A red thermal bag with the logo Lancaster's Best Pizza lay on the back seat of Leroy Tanner's beat-up Ford. He had 15 minutes to deliver an order to Elm Street, which meant he had to hurry. A melodic ring from the app broke the silence in the cabin. Leroy sighed. Another order. He glanced at his smartphone screen and accepted the call. A large pepperoni and a soda to Maple Avenue, House 43, Apartment 12. Not bad, it's on the way. Tanner started the car and pulled out of the pizzeria parking lot. The day was drawing to a close, and there was a pleasant early autumn chill in the air. The sky was clear, with only a few clouds floating high above. Just like that day in Baghdad, an uninvited thought flashed through his mind. Leroy shook his head, chasing away the memory. It had been 3 years since he returned from the army, but memories still popped up at the most inopportune moments. Peaceful life in Lancaster was supposed to be a new chapter, but sometimes it seemed that the pages of his military years refused to turn. The traffic light at the intersection turned yellow. Leroy slowed down smoothly, watching an elderly couple with a dog cross the road. Patience and attentiveness were what had helped him survive in the dusty hell of the Middle East. He had carried these qualities over into civilian life. Delivering pizza was a temporary job. In another 6 months, he would have enough to pay for programming courses. Technology had always fascinated him, and even in the army he often tinkered with computers in his rare free time. Now every dollar in tips brought him closer to his goal. Tanner parked outside an apartment building on Maple Street. He took out the thermal bag, went up to the second floor, and rang the doorbell. A young woman with a child in her arms took the order and smiled gratefully. "Thank you, you saved our evening." "You're welcome," Leroy replied with his usual smile. Back in his car, he checked the time. He had 20 minutes until his next order on Maple Avenue, enough time to stop by the pizzeria and pick up the order. The chefs and other delivery drivers were bustling about at Lancaster's Best Pizza. Chef Donnie, a heavy-set man with a good-natured smile, nodded to Leroy. "Tanner, your order is almost ready. 5 minutes." Leroy leaned against the counter, watching the coordinated work in the kitchen. He liked the atmosphere. No tension, no fear, just the smell of dough and sauces. This wasn't a stakeout under the blazing sun with a gun at the ready. "Are you daydreaming again?" Eric, another delivery guy with whom they sometimes traded orders, appeared beside him. "Still dreaming about your computers? Soon it won't be a dream," Leroy replied. "Just a little longer." "You've been saying that for 6 months," Eric laughed. "But I believe you'll make it. You're not the type to give up halfway." "Order for Maple Avenue is ready," Donnie shouted, placing the box on the counter. Leroy took the pizza, put it in a cooler bag, and headed for the address. Maple Avenue was one of those neighborhoods where mostly young professionals lived. Scientists, doctors, engineers. Number 43 turned out to be a modern apartment building with underground parking and a concierge. "Delivery to apartment 12, Leroy told the concierge, a middle-aged woman with an attentive gaze. "Go ahead, the elevator is on the right," she nodded, making a note in the logbook. When he reached the 4th floor, Leroy knocked on the door of apartment 12. A muffled voice came from inside. Someone was speaking in a raised voice. "I said I'm not going to put up with this. You don't understand what you're talking about." The voice stopped abruptly as the door opened. A young woman stood in the doorway with a phone pressed to her ear. She was dressed in simple jeans and a t-shirt with the logo of some scientific conference. Her dark curly hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her eyes were filled with anxiety. "I have to go," she said quickly into the phone and hung up. "Hello, is this my pizza?" "Large pepperoni and soda for Nia Jackson?" Leroy asked, checking the receipt. "Yes, that's me." While the girl was looking for her money, Leroy involuntarily glanced around the visible part of the apartment. It was a professional habit left over from his military days, always assessing his surroundings. The apartment was neat but showed signs of activity. There were stacks of papers on the table and an open laptop nearby. A large white board hung on the wall, covered with formulas and strange symbols. Some of the notes were circled in red marker and connected with arrows. "Here you go." Nia held out the money. Her hand was shaking slightly. "Keep the change." "Thanks." Leroy handed her the order. "Enjoy your meal." "Thank you." she repeated distractedly, as if her thoughts were far away. When the door closed, Leroy stood there for a second. Something about this girl seemed strange to him. The tension in her voice, her nervousness, the bored with the notes. But in the end, it was none of his business. Maybe she was just having a hard day at work, or had had a fight with her boyfriend. Going downstairs, he nodded to the concierge and went outside. Evening Lancaster was sinking into twilight, and the streetlights were coming on. 3 more deliveries, and he could go home. The next morning began as usual for Leroy: a jog, a shower, breakfast, and a cup of strong coffee while watching the morning news on TV. He was about to review his programming study materials before his afternoon shift when the local news anchor caught his attention. Tragic incident in Lancaster. A 25-year-old woman was found dead in an apartment on Maple Avenue this morning. Police are investigating the case as a homicide. The victim has been identified as Nia Jackson, a research assistant at Biosynthesis. Law enforcement agencies are asking anyone with any information to contact the Lancaster Police Department. Leroy froze with his cup in his hand. Nia Jackson, the same girl he had delivered pizza to yesterday, the one who had been talking nervously on the phone and looked worried. He slowly put the cup down on the table. The coincidence seemed unreal. Yesterday she ordered pizza, and today she was dead. Leroy picked up the phone, found the police station number, and after a moment's thought, dialed it. Perhaps his observations could be useful. "Lancaster Police Department, how can I help you?" a female voice answered. "Hello, I'm calling about the incident on Maple Avenue. I delivered a pizza to that apartment last night and may have been one of the last people to see." Leroy faltered. "See this woman alive. Please don't hang up." After a pause, a man with a deep, slightly hoarse voice picked up the phone. "Detective Tyrone Hayes. Who am I speaking with?" "Leroy Tanner, sir. I work as a delivery driver for Lancaster's Best Pizza. Yesterday, at around 6 p.m., I delivered an order to Nia Jackson." "And you're certain it was her?" "Yes, I checked the name on the receipt. Maple Avenue, number 43, apartment 12. Mr. Tanner, can you come down to the station to give a statement?" "Sure. My shift starts in 2 hours, but I can come right now." "Great. Ask for me at the front desk." The Lancaster Police Department was located in the center of town in an old but well-maintained red brick building. Inside, it smelled of coffee and paper. Leroy identified himself to the officer on duty and was escorted to Detective Hayes' office a few minutes later. Tyrone Hayes was a strongly built man in his 40s with piercing eyes and short hair streaked with gray at the temples. His desk was covered with files, and a board hung on the wall with photographs and notes on current investigations. "Have a seat, Mr. Tanner," the detective said, pointing to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for your cooperation. It's not every day we get witnesses coming to us." "I thought the information might be important," Leroy replied, settling into the chair. "You were right to do so." Hayes opened his notebook. "So, you delivered a pizza to Nia Jackson yesterday at around 6 in the evening. Tell me in detail what you noticed. Any detail could be important." Leroy concentrated, trying to remember the previous evening. "When I knocked on the door, she was talking on the phone. From the tone of her voice, it sounded like a tense conversation. She said something like, 'I told you I'm not going to put up with this. You don't understand what you're talking about.' When she opened the door, she quickly ended the conversation." "Did you hear who she was talking to, a man or a woman?" "No, just her voice." "Anything else?" She looked nervous. Her hands were shaking when she handed me the money. "And also..." Leroy paused for a moment. There was a large board in the apartment with some formulas and symbols on it. Some of the notes were circled in red and connected with arrows. Hayes looked up from his notebook with interest. "You have a good memory for details, Mr. Tanner." "Army habit, sir. 2 tours in Iraq taught me to notice things others miss." "Did you serve?" The detective gave him an appraising look. "That's right. I was discharged 3 years ago." Hayes nodded understandingly. "Anything else unusual in the apartment?" There were a lot of papers on the table and an open laptop. It looked like she was working. Overall, the apartment looked neat, but there were signs of activity. "Did you notice anyone nearby? Maybe someone was waiting in the hallway or got in the elevator with you?" No, there was no one in the hallway. I was alone in the elevator. But there was a concierge downstairs, a middle-aged woman. She could see who was entering and leaving the building. We've already interviewed her. Hayes nodded. Mr. Tanner, you said you delivered the order at around 6 in the evening. Can you be more specific about the time? It should be recorded in the order system, but I think it was between 6 and 6:15. The detective wrote something down in his notebook, then looked at Leroy with a long, searching gaze. Where were you yesterday between 8 in the evening and midnight? Leroy understood where the detective was going with this. After my shift, I was at home. I was studying programming. I'm saving up for a course. Can anyone confirm that? I live alone, but there should be CCTV footage from the entrance to my apartment building. I came back around 10:30 and didn't leave again. Hayes nodded, making another note. This is standard procedure, Mr. Tanner. We're checking everyone who had contact with the victim in the last hours of his life. I understand, Detective. According to preliminary information from the medical examiner, death occurred between 8 and 10 p.m. Hayes leaned back in his chair. Are you sure you didn't miss anything? Maybe Nia Jackson said something that struck you as odd? Leroy mentally replayed his entire conversation with the girl. No, she just said, thank you. She seemed distracted, as if her mind was somewhere else. All right. The detective handed him his business card. If you remember anything else, even the smallest detail, call me. Anytime. Leroy took the card, studying the stern font with the detective's name and contact information. Mr. Tanner, Hayes' voice became more serious. Until we have all the facts, I would ask that you not leave town and be available for further questions. Of course, Detective. I'm not going anywhere. Leaving the police station, Leroy stood on the steps, looking at the busy street. Nia Jackson, 25 years old, worked in a research lab and was nervous when he delivered her pizza. And now she was dead. He took out his phone and dialed the pizzeria manager to warn him of a possible delay. The image of the girl with the whiteboard covered in formulas wouldn't leave his mind. What could have happened in the few hours after he left? And what did that tense phone call mean? Leroy knew it wasn't his business. The police would figure it out. But somewhere deep inside, a feeling familiar from his work awakened, a sense that something important was slipping away, something hidden between the lines and behind the mundane details. With these thoughts in mind, he headed for his car. The day was just beginning, and somewhere in Lancaster, Detective Tyrone Hayes was already unraveling the web of events that had led to the death of a young woman whom Leroy had delivered dinner to just yesterday. The biosynthesis laboratory was located in a modern glass and concrete building on the outskirts of Lancaster. Detective Tyrone Hayes parked his car in the parking lot and glanced at the austere facade. Behind these walls, Nia Jackson had spent the last years of her life working on something that could now be linked to her death. Inside the building, the detective was met by security. After checking his documents, he was escorted to a spacious conference room where Dr. Andre Foster, head of the research department, was already waiting. Detective Hayes. Foster rose to meet him, extending his hand. He was a tall man in his 50s with a neat beard and an attentive gaze behind thin-rimmed glasses. A terrible tragedy. We are all shocked. Thank you for your cooperation, Doctor. Foster, Hayes replied, shaking the outstretched hand. I understand you have a busy schedule, but I need to ask you a few questions about Dr. Jackson. Of course, I'm at your disposal. Foster pointed to the chairs. Have a seat. Would you like some coffee? I'd love some. While the assistant brought the drinks, Hayes took out his notebook. Dr. Foster, tell me about Nia Jackson's work in your lab. Foster took a sip of coffee as if gathering his thoughts. Nia was an exceptionally talented biochemist. She joined us 3 years ago, right after receiving her doctorate. For the past 18 months, she has been leading a project to develop a new method of delivering drugs across the blood-brain barrier. Excuse me, across what? Hayes raised an eyebrow. The blood-brain barrier is a protective mechanism that prevents many substances from passing from the blood into the brain. It's an evolutionary defense, but it also creates problems in the treatment of certain brain diseases. Nia was working on a method that would allow drugs to effectively cross this barrier. And how successful was her work? Foster paused before answering. Very successful. In fact, she was close to a breakthrough. At least, that's what she said at the last debriefing 3 days ago. This breakthrough, how valuable is it? If the technology had been confirmed by clinical trials, we could be talking millions, possibly billions of dollars. It would have paved the way for treatments for a whole range of neurodegenerative diseases. Foster adjusted his glasses. But let me get this straight, Detective. You believe her research could have been a motive for murder? At this stage, I'm considering all possible motives, Hayes replied evenly. Who else worked with Dr. Jackson on this project? Kiara Robinson, a junior researcher, worked directly with her. They were not only colleagues but also friends, as far as I know. 2 other lab assistants helped with the experiments. I'll need to talk to everyone. Dr. Foster, did Nia have any conflicts with any of her colleagues? Foster frowned, as if the question had puzzled him. Nia was focused on her work, but she got along well with her colleagues overall. Although, he paused. Lately, we've had some disagreements about when to publish the results. Explain that in more detail. Nia wanted to publish the preliminary results as soon as possible. I insisted on more thorough verification and additional experiments. In science, premature publication can damage one's reputation if the results are not confirmed. Were these disagreements serious? It was a professional discussion, Foster said firmly. No personal conflicts. Hayes made a note in his notebook. I'd like to examine Dr. Jackson's workspace and have access to her work computer. Of course. Our IT department has prepared everything you need. I'll show you in. Nia Jackson's lab was a sterile space with state-of-the-art equipment. On the wall hung a board similar to the one Leroy Tanner had seen in her apartment, only larger. It was covered with formulas and diagrams, some of which were circled in red. Is this related to her research? Hayes pointed to the board. Yes, these are her working notes for the project. Nia preferred to visualize her ideas first and then transfer them to the computer. Nia's desk was neatly organized, folders with documents, several scientific journals, a framed photograph of her standing next to a young woman, presumably Kiara Robinson. The IT specialist was already waiting for them, sitting at Nia's computer. We're giving you full access to Dr. Jackson's work computer, Foster said. Our specialist will help you navigate the files. Hayes nodded and sat down in front of the screen. He spent the next hour looking through files and folders, trying to get a sense of Nia's work and her connections within the company. Strange, muttered the IT specialist, looking through the access logs. Last night, at around 9:30, someone logged into the system using Dr. Jackson's account and accessed the folder with her research. Hayes looked up sharply. At 9:30? She was already dead by then. Can you trace where the access came from? The access was from her workstation here in the lab. The IT specialist pointed to the screen with the logs. Who else could have had access to her account? In theory, only she knew her password, but... Some employees write down their passwords or use easily guessed combinations. Hayes turned to Foster. Who had access to the lab last night? Several employees may have been here working late. I can provide a list based on the access control system. Do it as quickly as possible. I also noticed that there are no files newer than a week old in the folder with the latest research results. Is that normal? Foster frowned. No. Nia was supposed to upload the results of the latest experiments. She mentioned them at the meeting. The IT specialist quickly checked the system. It looks like several files were deleted last night during that same system access. Can they be recovered? Possibly, if they weren't permanently deleted. We'll need some time. Hayes nodded. Get on it immediately. Dr. Foster, where can I find Kiara Robinson? Meanwhile, in another part of Lancaster, Leroy Tanner sat in his apartment, browsing news sites on his tablet. He couldn't get the story of Nia Jackson's murder out of his head. He called his manager at the pizza place and took the day off, citing personal reasons. The internet was littered with headlines about the tragic death of a young scientist. One site mentioned that Nia had been working on a promising biomedical project. Another hinted at a possible connection between the murder and her professional activities. Leroy leaned back on the sofa and stared at the ceiling. An uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him. What if Detective Hayes seriously considered him a suspect? After all, he was one of the last people to see Nia alive. I didn't do anything, he reminded himself. but years of military experience had taught him that in difficult situations, it was better to act than to wait. He opened his notebook on his tablet and began to compile a list of everything he knew about Nia Jackson and the circumstances of their brief encounter. The tense phone call, the nervousness, the board with formulas. Who could have called her? What did they talk about? After some thought, Leroy decided to visit the house on Maple Avenue again. Perhaps the concierge would remember something useful. Parking nearby, he noticed that the entrance to the building was cordoned off with police tape, but the main stream of police officers had already dispersed. Leroy waited for an elderly couple to leave the building and slipped inside before the door closed. The same woman who had been at the front desk the day before was sitting behind the desk. She recognized him immediately. "You're the pizza delivery guy who came to see that poor girl yesterday," she said, shaking her head. "What a tragedy. So young." "Yes, Leroy hesitated, searching for the right words. "I spoke to the police this morning. I just wanted to know if you noticed anything unusual last night. Maybe someone went up to her after me?" The woman looked around, as if checking to see if anyone could hear them. "The police already asked. But I'll tell you, young man, Miss Jackson often had visitors. And yesterday, about an hour after you left, her friend came up to see her. They often worked together." "Friend? Do you know her name?" "Kiara, I think. She's tall and always well-dressed." "Did anyone else come by?" "I don't remember exactly." The woman frowned. "Although no, there was a man. I've seen him before. He works with Miss Jackson, but I can't remember his name." "When did he come by?" "It was late. I was finishing my shift. Must have been around 8. Leroy mentally noted the time. According to the detective, death had occurred between 8 and 10 in the evening. What did he look like? Tall, distinguished, with a beard, wearing glasses, 50 years old maybe. "Thanks, you've been a big help." Leaving the building, Leroy jotted down a few notes on his phone. Now he needed to find a way to talk to Nia's friend Kiara. A search on social media turned up results. Kiara Robinson worked at the same lab as Nia. Judging by her profile, they were indeed close friends. There were many photos of them together, including some from scientific conferences. Leroy noticed that some of the photos showed Kiara at a local cafe called Green Bean, not far from the biosynthesis lab. He decided to take a chance and check it out. Green Bean turned out to be a cozy place, popular with workers from nearby offices. Leroy ordered a coffee and sat down at a table by the window, from where he had a good view of the entrance. Luck smiled on him 40 minutes later when a tall woman he recognized from the photos entered the cafe. Kiara Robinson looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes and a tense line around her mouth spoke of a sleepless night and deep stress. She ordered a coffee to go and was about to leave when Leroy approached her. "Miss Robinson?" he said quietly, trying not to attract the attention of other patrons. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Leroy Tanner. I delivered pizza to Nia Jackson the night before she died." Kiara froze, studying his face intently. "Why are you telling me this?" "I talked to the police and told them everything I saw, but I still have questions. I know you were her friend. I feel like something's not right about this case." Kiara hesitated, then gestured for him to join her at a table in the corner. "I don't have much time," she said when they sat down. "The police questioned me all morning. I understand, it's just..." Nia seemed tense when I delivered her pizza. She was talking to someone on the phone and it sounded like an unpleasant conversation. Kiara squeezed her coffee cup. "Nia has been on edge lately. Her research, it was groundbreaking, a real breakthrough, but she had a difficult relationship with her superiors." "With Dr. Foster?" Kiara raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You know him?" "The concierge at Nia's building mentioned a tall man with a beard and glasses who came to see her the night before she died." "Foster came to her house?" Kiara looked shocked. "She didn't tell me. What kind of problems did Nia have with her superiors?" Kiara hesitated, as if weighing whether to trust a stranger. "Listen, Mr. Tanner, I don't know who you are or why you're asking me all these questions, but Nia was my best friend, and I want whoever did this to her to be held accountable." "I want that too," Leroy said sincerely. "I'm just trying to understand what happened." Kiara took a deep breath. Nia developed a new method of delivering drugs across the blood-brain barrier. It's a huge breakthrough for the treatment of many brain diseases. But in recent weeks, she started receiving strange messages. Threats. What kind of threats? Anonymous emails, demanding that she stop her research or hand over her data. She didn't take them seriously, thinking they were from competitors or just someone's stupid joke. Did she tell Foster about this? Yes, but he dismissed it, saying it was normal in a highly competitive scientific environment. Kiara paused. But the thing is, Nia discovered something strange in the company's financial reports. Some of the money allocated to our project was going somewhere else. She started digging deeper. And what did she find? I'm not sure. She became more cautious, sharing less information even with me, but yesterday... Kiara paused. Yesterday afternoon, she called me in a state of agitation. She said she had found evidence that would blow the scientific world apart. We agreed to meet at her place in the evening so she could show me what she had found. And did you go to her place? Yes, around 7. But she was acting strange, nervous. She said she couldn't show me the documents right away, that she needed to check something first. She asked me to come back tomorrow. I didn't insist and left. What about the computer? Was she working on it when you were there? Yes, she was typing something when I arrived. Then she quickly closed the document. Leroy thought for a moment. Miss Robinson, does Detective Hayes know about Nia's problems with management and these anonymous threats? I told him everything I knew. Kiara glanced at her watch. I have to get back. Foster called an emergency meeting. One more question. Did Nia keep copies of her research? Backups, maybe? Kiara smiled faintly. Nia was paranoid in a good way. She always made multiple copies of important data, usually on a flash drive she carried with her, and in encrypted cloud storage. A flash drive? Did the police find it? I don't know, but Nia always wore it on a lanyard with her keys. Kiara stood up. If you find out anything important, call me. She wrote her number on a napkin and handed it to Leroy. Be careful, Mr. Tanner. If Nia was killed because of her research, it meant that a lot of money or reputation was at stake, and motives like that made people dangerous. After Kiara left, Leroy sat in the cafe for a while, thinking about the information he had received. Now the picture was becoming clearer. Promising research, financial fraud, threats, strange behavior from the boss. He decided to share this information with Detective Hayes. Taking out his business card, Leroy dialed the number. Detective Hayes speaking. Detective, this is Leroy Tanner. I have new information on the Nia Jackson case. Hayes paused for a second. Mr. Tanner, I appreciate your help, but I would prefer that you not conduct your own investigation. I just talked to the concierge at Nia's building and happened to run into Kiara Robinson, Leroy lied. She told me about Nia's problems with management and the anonymous threats. I know about that, Mr. Tanner. We've already interviewed Miss Robinson. And did you know that Nia had a flash drive with copies of her research? She always carried it with her keys. This time the pause was longer. Interesting. There was no flash drive in Nia Jackson's personal belongings. Thank you for the information, Mr. Tanner, but I strongly recommend that you leave the investigation to the professionals. Of course, Detective. I just wanted to help. After ending the conversation, Leroy looked thoughtfully out the window. Something didn't add up in this case. If Nia always carried the flash drive with her, where was it now? Stolen by the killer? Hidden by Nia herself? He remembered the strange board with formulas in Nia's apartment. There were some notes in red connected by arrows. What if they weren't just scientific notes, but some kind of code or clue? Perhaps Nia had sensed danger and left a hint. Leroy decided to take another look at Nia's social media, searching for any clues about her condition and thoughts in the last days before her death. Perhaps there he would find the key to solving this mystery. Meanwhile, at the biosynthesis lab, Detective Hayes stood in front of Nia Jackson's computer, watching the screen where an IT specialist was trying to recover the deleted files. This is strange, said the specialist, pointing to the recovery data. The files weren't just deleted, they were overwritten with random data. Someone really wanted to make sure they couldn't be recovered. Professional work? Yes, a special program was used to permanently delete the data. Hayes rubbed his chin. So we have a murder and theft of intellectual property. Someone really wanted to get their hands on Dr. Jackson's research and cover their tracks. He looked at his phone, remembering the strange call from the pizza delivery guy. The flash drive. It could be an important clue. Can you check if anyone accessed the system from Dr. Jackson's workstation this morning, before we sealed the room? The IT specialist quickly checked the logs. Yes, doctor. Foster requested access to her files at 7 this morning. He said it was necessary to maintain continuity of research. Hayes looked thoughtfully at the photo on Nia's desk, where she stood next to Kiara Robinson. 2 friends, 2 colleagues. Which one did Nia Jackson trust with her secrets? And who could have had a motive for killing her? It was time for a more detailed conversation with Dr. Andre Foster. The morning of the 3rd day of the investigation began for Leroy Tanner with a cup of strong coffee and a plan of action. Yesterday's conversation with Kiara Robinson had made him look at the situation in a new light. If Nia Jackson had indeed made a scientific breakthrough that could be worth millions and uncovered financial fraud at the company, someone had a serious motive to silence her. Leroy opened his tablet and looked through the biosynthesis page again. The Our Team section listed all the key employees, including the lab assistants. He wrote down a few names, people who worked directly with Nia and might know something. One detail caught his attention. A small news item in the partnerships section. 6 months ago, Biosynthesis had announced a strategic partnership with Neuropharm, a company specializing in the development of drugs for the treatment of neurological diseases. What if this was somehow related to Nia's research? One detail caught his attention. A small news item in the partnerships section. 6 months ago, Biosynthesis had announced a strategic partnership with Neuropharm, a company specializing in the development of drugs for the treatment of neurological diseases. What if this was somehow related to Nia's research? Leroy decided to take direct action. Putting on his best shirt and jeans, he headed for the biosynthesis building. Instead of going through the main entrance, he walked around the building and noticed a small cafe on the 1st floor that was clearly popular with the company's employees. It was the perfect place to accidentally run into someone from the lab. Leroy decided to take direct action. Putting on his best shirt and jeans, he headed for the biosynthesis building. Instead of going through the main entrance, he walked around the building and noticed a small cafe on the 1st floor that was clearly popular with the company's employees. It was the perfect place to accidentally run into someone from the lab. After ordering a coffee, Leroy sat down by the window and began watching people come and go. His military training had taught him patience. Sometimes he had to wait for hours in ambush without losing his concentration. After ordering a coffee, Leroy sat down by the window and began watching people come and go. His military training had taught him patience. Sometimes he had to wait for hours in ambush without losing his concentration. Fortune smiled on him 40 minutes later when a young man in a lab coat with a biosynthesis badge entered the cafe. He ordered a coffee to go and was about to leave when Leroy approached him. "Excuse me," he began in a friendly tone. "Do you work at Biosynthesis? I'm looking for information about their internship program." The young man looked at Leroy appraisingly. Fortune smiled on him 40 minutes later when a young man in a lab coat with a biosynthesis badge entered the cafe. He ordered a coffee to go and was about to leave when Leroy approached him. "Excuse me," he began in a friendly tone. "Do you work at Biosynthesis? I'm looking for information about their internship program." The young man looked at Leroy appraisingly. "Yes, I'm Jamal, a lab assistant in the research department. But for questions about internships, you'd better contact HR. Actually, I wanted to find out more about the real work in the lab, you know?" Leroy smiled. "I heard you had some interesting developments in neuropharmacology." Jamal visibly tensed up. "How do you know about our projects?" "Yes, I'm Jamal, a lab assistant in the research department. But for questions about internships, you'd better contact HR. Actually, I wanted to find out more about the real work in the lab, you know?" Leroy smiled. "I heard you had some interesting developments in neuropharmacology." Jamal visibly tensed up. "How do you know about our projects?" "I'm studying biochemistry," Leroy lied. "I've read Dr. Jackson's work. Terrible tragedy, by the way. Did you work with her?" The mention of Nia clearly hurt Jamal. His shoulders slumped. Yes, I was on her team. It's a shock to all of us. I can imagine. I hear she was close to a breakthrough? Jamal looked around as if checking to see if anyone could hear them. I'm studying biochemistry, Leroy lied. I've read Dr. Jackson's work. Terrible tragedy, by the way. Did you work with her? The mention of Nia clearly hurt Jamal. His shoulders slumped. Yes, I was on her team. It's a shock to all of us. I can imagine. I hear she was close to a breakthrough? Jamal looked around as if checking to see if anyone could hear them. Listen, I don't know who you are, but I can't talk about the company's projects. Especially not now. Leroy lowered his voice. I understand. I just thought that if her research was so important, maybe it had something to do with what happened. These words clearly struck a chord. Jamal hesitated, then nodded toward a table in the corner. I have 5 minutes. Listen, I don't know who you are, but I can't talk about the company's projects. Especially not now. Leroy lowered his voice. I understand. I just thought that if her research was so important, maybe it had something to do with what happened. These words clearly struck a chord. Jamal hesitated, then nodded toward a table in the corner. I have 5 minutes. When they sat down, Jamal spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. Doctor. Jackson was really close to a breakthrough. Her method of delivering drugs across the blood-brain barrier could have changed the entire industry. But lately, things had been strange in the lab. Strange. When they sat down, Jamal spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. Doctor. Jackson was really close to a breakthrough. Her method of delivering drugs across the blood-brain barrier could have changed the entire industry. But lately, things had been strange in the lab. Strange. There was constant conflict between her and Dr. Foster. He demanded to see all the data and findings and insisted on additional experiments, even though the results were already conclusive. Maybe he just wanted to make sure the results were reliable, Leroy suggested. There was constant conflict between her and Dr. Foster. He demanded to see all the data and findings and insisted on additional experiments, even though the results were already conclusive. Maybe he just wanted to make sure the results were reliable, Leroy suggested. Possibly, but there was something else. Jamal glanced at his watch. About a month ago, I overheard Foster talking to someone on the phone. He was talking about his investments and that NF-230 would soon be entering clinical trials. NF-123? Possibly, but there was something else. Jamal glanced at his watch. About a month ago, I overheard Foster talking to someone on the phone. He was talking about his investments and that NF-230 would soon be entering clinical trials. NF-123? It's an experimental drug from Neuropharma for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. They're developing their own method of delivering drugs across the blood-brain barrier. Basically, it's a competing technology. Leroy carefully concealed his excitement. If Foster had invested in a competing technology, he had a direct financial interest in seeing to it that Nia's research did not succeed. Did Dr. Jackson know about this? I don't know. But the day before she died, I heard her and Foster arguing loudly in her lab. She was shouting something about a conflict of interest and ethical violations. Jamal glanced at his watch again and stood up. I have to go. And I didn't talk to you, okay? The lab is on edge right now. The police are everywhere. Everyone is afraid for their jobs. Of course. Thanks for the information. When Jamal left, Leroy immediately dialed Detective Hayes' number. Detective, it's Leroy Tanner again. I have important information about Dr. Foster. There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. Mr. Tanner, I appreciate your help, but I already told you. Foster invested in Neuropharm, Leroy interrupted. They have competing technology. He had a direct financial interest in the failure of Nia's research. There was a pause. Where did you get this information? I heard it from one of the lab employees. The day before her death, Nia accused Foster of a conflict of interest. Mr. Tanner, Hayes' voice hardened, I appreciate your initiative, but you are interfering with an official investigation. If you continue, I will be forced to take action. I understand, Detective. I just wanted to help. After ending the conversation, Leroy realized that Hayes was right. He wasn't a police officer and had no authority to investigate, but something inside him wouldn't let him stop. There were too many coincidences, too obvious a motive. He decided to take one more step, to meet with Kiara Robinson again. He dialed the number she had left and arranged to meet her at the same Green Bean Cafe in an hour. Meanwhile, Detective Tyrone Hayes sat in his office studying financial documents provided by the Economic Crimes Division. What had started as a murder investigation was gradually turning into a complex case involving corporate espionage and financial fraud. The information obtained from Leroy Tanner had been confirmed. Dr. Andre Foster did indeed own a significant stake in Neuropharma through a shell company. It was a classic conflict of interest that he had failed to disclose to biosynthesis management. The phone on Hayes's desk rang. Detective Hayes speaking. "Sir, this is the crime lab. We found something interesting in Jackson's apartment. Microscopic inscriptions were found on the board with formulas, made with a special marker that is only visible under ultraviolet light. What does it say? It looks like encrypted coordinates or directions. And one more thing, we found traces of glue on the back of the photo frame on her desk. Check that frame immediately." "We already did, sir. There was a USB drive hidden between the photo and the back of the frame. It's very small, about the size of a fingernail." Hayes sat up straight in his chair. "What's on it?" "Encrypted files. Our experts are trying to access them, but it will take some time. Work faster and keep this fine secret." At the Green Bean Cafe, Kiara Robinson looked even more exhausted than the day before. "I don't have much time, Mr. Tanner," she said, sitting down at a table. "What did you want to discuss?" "I spoke with Jamal, a lab technician in your department," Leroy began. "He said that Foster had invested in Neuropharm and had a vested interest in Nia's research failing." Kiara paled. "How did you—" She shook her head. "Never mind. Yes, it's true. Nia discovered it the day before she died. She was looking through the project funding documents and found some strange transfers. She started digging deeper and discovered Foster's connection to Neuropharm. Why didn't you tell me about this yesterday?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust you." Her voice sounded desperate. "I told Detective Hayes everything this morning, and—" She faltered. "There's something else I didn't tell you. I saw Foster in Nia's building the night she was killed." "What?" Leroy leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell the police right away?" "I was scared." Kiara lowered her voice. "I went back to Nia's house around 8 in the evening. I wanted to talk to her again, to convince her to show me what she had found. As I approached the building, I saw Foster coming out. He looked agitated, constantly looking around. He was holding some kind of folder in his hands." "Did you tell Detective Hayes about this?" "Yes, this morning, after spending a sleepless night thinking about what to do." Kiara nervously fiddled with a napkin. "I'm scared, Mr. Tanner. If Foster really killed Nia, what's to stop him from getting rid of me?" "The police will keep you safe," Leroy assured her. "There's something else. Did Nia leave any clues as to where copies of her research might be hidden?" "I don't know." Kiara thought for a moment. Although she often talked about a plan B, she said that if anything happened to her, the truth would come out anyway. "I thought she was just being dramatic." "What about the board with the formulas in her apartment? Could there be any encrypted messages there?" Kiara's eyes widened. "Theoretically, yes. Nia loved puzzles and codes. We used to play games like that a lot when we were in college. She had her own method of encryption based on chemical formulas." Leroy took out his phone. "I have to tell Detective Hayes." At that moment, Detective Hayes was standing in the conference room of the police station, looking at a large board where all the evidence and testimony in the Nia Jackson case had been gathered. The picture was gradually coming together. There was a knock at the door, and an officer entered the room. "Sir, the crime lab was able to decrypt the files on the flash drive. It's a complete description of Dr. Jackson's methodology as well as—" The officer paused. "Financial documents proving that Dr. Foster received money from Neuropharma and sabotaged the research at biosynthesis. Has the arrest warrant for Dr. Foster been signed?" "Yes, sir. The arrest team is ready." "Let's go immediately." In the biosynthesis laboratory, Andre Foster hurriedly gathered documents into his briefcase. His usually impassive face showed signs of anxiety. The phone on his desk rang, but he ignored it. Time was running out. The door to his office burst open, and Detective Hayes appeared in the doorway, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Dr. Andre Foster, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Nia Jackson." Foster froze, then slowly raised his hands. "This is ridiculous. You have no evidence." "We have everything," Hayes replied calmly. "The flash drive Nia hid in the photo frame, your financial ties to Neuropharm, the testimony of Kiara Robinson, who saw you leaving Nia's house on the night of the murder, and traces of your DNA under the victim's fingernails. She fought for her life, didn't she?" Foster's face contorted. "She was going to ruin everything. Years of work, millions in investments. She didn't understand that in our business. Sometimes you have to make compromises." "Tell me what happened in her apartment that night," Hayes demanded. Foster sank into a chair, suddenly aged and broken. "I went there to talk to her. I wanted to convince her not to publish her findings on the financing. I offered her a stake in Neuropharma, but she refused, saying she had already sent copies of the data to several people." He shook his head. "I didn't mean to kill her. It happened by accident. We were arguing. She pushed me. I pushed her back. She hit her head on the edge of the table. And then you took her research and deleted the data from her computer," Hayes finished. "I panicked," Foster said quietly. "It got out of control. Stand up and turn around. Hands behind your back." As the officers handcuffed Foster, Hayes noticed Leroy Tanner standing in the hallway next to Kiara Robinson. The detective approached them after Foster was taken away. "Thanks for your help," he said to Leroy, "although I still don't approve of civilians taking matters into their own hands in an investigation." "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time," Leroy replied. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." "Your observations about the oddities in Nia's apartment were crucial. Without them, we might not have noticed the board with the formulas and the code that led us to the flash drive." Kiara watched with tears in her eyes as the police led Foster away. "Nia said that the truth always finds a way out. She was right." "What will happen to her research?" Leroy asked. "The biosynthesis management has promised to continue the work and publish the results with her name credited," Kiara replied. "Her name will be immortalized in science." "A good way to honor her memory," Hayes nodded. A week after Foster's arrest, Leroy Tanner sat in his apartment, staring at the Lancaster Police Academy's website. The events of the past few days had forced him to rethink his plans for the future. Participating in the investigation had awakened something in him that he hadn't felt since his time in the Army. A sense of purpose, an opportunity to help people, to use his observation and analytical skills to restore justice. He had already spoken to Detective Hayes about the possibility of enrolling in the academy. The detective was surprised, but supported his decision, and even offered to write a letter of recommendation. Of course, programming remained an important part of his interests. But working for the police could give him what he was looking for after returning from the Army: structure, discipline, and most importantly, the opportunity to protect those who needed it. Leroy looked at the photo in the local newspaper. Kiara Robinson stood on the steps of the biosynthesis lab, announcing the creation of the Nia Jackson Research Grant for young scientists. The life of one talented woman had been cut short, but her legacy would live on and help others. He closed the Academy's website and opened the application form. Sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change the course of a life. A pizza delivery that started a murder investigation was now leading him to a new calling. With determination in his heart, Leroy began to fill out the form.